Hello to everyone and warm welcome to People and Purpose podcast. This is a podcast where we explore the cultures, work-life, equity, well-being and the future of work through the lens of purpose-led leader. My name is Tarja Takko and I am the CEO and founder of Takko Advisory, which is a purpose-driven advisory firm empowering organizations to build positive cultures and leadership, helping CEOs and companies succeed in transformation and strategy implementation. At Takko Advisory, we also believe in creating not just business success, but positive social impact. In this episode, we will put our lens on the UK, and I'm very excited to welcome Chris Moon as our special guest. Let me introduce a bit who Chris is. Chris Moon is a former British Army officer, humanitarian, and one of the few people to have survived being taken prisoner by the Khmer Rouge. I hope I said it right. After surviving a landmine explosion, he became an entrance athlete and motivational speaker, helping people step beyond what they thought was possible. Chris inspires individuals and organizations to push beyond limits. Chris has worked all over the world with different nationalities, cultures, and religions. And what he has realized is that our similarities are far greater than our differences. Chris's purpose of life, his why, is to help people make the best of their lives and do what they do better. And with Chris's own words, to spread kindness, sunshine, and good humor, because life's too short to go around with a bottom lip like a rolled up sleeping bag. I could not agree more. So warm welcome, Chris.
Thank you.
Hey, let's start by understanding a bit more the journey and purpose of you, Chris. Chris, your life has been shaped by really extraordinary challenges and resilience. How did these experiences shape your leadership philosophy?
I think there is nothing like experience to teach us. And I've been very privileged to have had some very extreme experiences which have taught me a huge amount about human nature. I have a background in leading large teams in high-risk operations in hazardous areas, and that's taught me a lot about human nature. And also, I masters in human behavior, so there's academic rigor behind the principles that I share. And as you know, I've worked a lot with the business schools and with psychologists. So the good news is leadership is common sense, and helping people achieve their best is common sense. But quite often common sense is not very common because emotion gets in the way. And of course, it takes a long time to gain experience. So what I can do is save people a lot of time because I can share the experience that will enable them to use it and to move forward.
Hey, I talked about your why in the introduction, but can you tell a bit more? How do you define purpose and how has it driven your career and impact?
I've always, as a child, been encouraged to think. And I believe the whole of my life turned out to be a search for wisdom and to understand. And for all of us, the most important thing is to find our purpose and our meaning. And I have learned losing 2 limbs teaches you something. It's actually not having things that makes us truly happy. What makes us truly happy is doing things. And so I've also learned the true nature of human relationships is about creating trust and interdependence. As human beings, we're meant to be together and to cooperate.
What is an advice that you would give to leaders who want to lead with purpose and inspire others? You know, it's not coming so automatically to everybody. So what would be a piece of advice from you,
Well,
Chris?
when I did my officer training at the Royal Military Academy Sandhurst, the motto there is serve to lead. So I think that's a great starting point to say, well, my purpose is to serve the people that I lead. And what is it that we want to achieve? How do we create a culture that will create trust. And so the first starting point is looking in the mirror for a leader, personal leadership. If we can't lead ourselves, then how can we lead others? So as leaders, we need to get our head in the right place. We need to understand ourselves, our strengths, our weaknesses, where we might need help. And also, the most important thing is to take the ego out of it. And, it's so important not to need to stamp authority. It's about creating consensus and cooperation. And quite often, where I've seen leadership go wrong, it's because either people are feeling insecure or they feel that they should be the center of attention. And perhaps great leadership is about enabling other people to thrive and to shine.
Couldn't agree more. Definitely so. Well, how do you think then individuals and organizations can build resilience in difficult times? And boy, there is really difficult times currently in so many different levels. So what would be
Yes.
your piece of advice?
I think firstly, I do a lot of work on resilience. So as you know, I run workshops and I also run programs to help organizations create the culture that they want and get the leadership direction and consensus that they need to move forward. I also do a lot of keynotes on resilience. And very simply, it starts with understanding that the principle of life that is most important is to understand, look, it's about rising above the things that drag us down. So recognize that we all only have so much psychological fuel in the tank. And the important thing when you do a race like Badwater, Death Valley, or the picture you can see that with me with the flag there, with those desert runs, it starts by you having to believe that you can do it. And then you start to come up with a plan, but recognize that we all only have so much physical fuel in the tank and so much psychological fuel. So what we have to learn to do is recharge our psychological batteries, and the physical one's easy. In a desert run, 135 miles in the hottest place on earth. So what's that? About 240, 250 kilometers. And what's important there is to recognize, okay, you need to keep the fluid going in to enable your body to have enough to go. But in terms of the psychology of it, it's about focusing on our reasons. Reasons are psychological rocket fuel. And we only have so much fuel in the tank. So we need to find ways to recharge our psychological batteries. And I'll give you an example, if I may. I recently did some work with surgeons who are under immense pressure. And what I did was I grew up farming. So I had a very unusual upbringing, and I achieved my life's ambition by 21. I was in a farming partnership, and we were poor. There was no land or money in my bit of the family, but I came from a farming background and I desperately wanted to do it. And my business partner had the most brilliant attitude to work. And he said, look, we can never be sick. We can never be injured because we have to milk the cows twice a day. So you have to look after yourself. But also, when we start each day, because we start in the summer at 4 o'clock in the morning, we finish at 11 at night. What you have to do is get your head in the right place. So here's the question. If we're talking about resilience, what do you do when you start the day to get your head in the right place? And there are loads of things that we can do, and I help people find those things. But so that's the starting point. Get your head in the right place. So with these surgeons, we ran a workshop, and then a month later came back, and each of them did different things to get their head in the right place at the start of the day. Some would meditate, some would go for a run, some would do an exercise routine, some would walk their dog, some would sing, some would do professional development. For each of them, it was different. Some of them would talk to their wives. Some of them would talk to somebody else's wife. It really was very complicated. However, the important thing is that when they found ways to get their head in the right place, they owned their day, and it was much easier to keep it there. So that's the starter.
Mm, That's the start. What if you're struggling finding your way of getting your head to the right place?
Ask for help. Asking for help is a sign of strength,
Mm,
not a sign of weakness. Uh,
mm,
and and quite often, I think all of us have had this experience in life where we are struggling, and then when you talk to someone, they might often say, "Well, is it really that bad?"
mm,
Or you might find somebody says, "Well, what are you going to do about it?" And that will help us on our journey. And how do we solve our problems? So, you know, my story is very much about getting out of a deep dark hole. I'm not a brilliant sportsman. I've had to work to do everything I do. I haven't been blessed by being a naturally great runner. To do the ultra distance events, the endurance events, I've had to work extremely hard. And I wasn't naturally suited to getting up at 4 o'clock every morning. I had to work and make it a habit.
mm,
And
mm,
so here's another question: how do we develop healthy mental habits? And asking for help is one of them. Getting a
mm,
different sense of perspective. So the first thing I would say is build a support network. Who are the people who will support us? Who are the people who will help us to shine brightly? And
yeah.
not everybody wants us to, but also ultimately we must own our own problems, because when we take ownership for whatever it is that is dragging us down, we can start to change it. So take
Mm,
ownership. And if something happens to us that we don't feel is our fault, it's even more important to find a way to deal with it, because it's even more important for us to take ownership, because if we don't, we become
mm,
victims.
mm, yeah.
I survived as a prisoner of the Khmer Rouge because I made a decision when we were first taken prisoner to not be a victim, to never look like a victim, never think like a victim, and never behave like a victim.
Mm. Yeah, and you have worked a lot with individuals. You work a lot with organizations, companies, but you have also worked with individuals, so really helping them to find that what gets them up and running and going in the beginning of the day.
Yes, absolutely. And
Mm,
what's interesting is um, there are other techniques we can use to help people get their head in the right place to start with. But here's the thing: how do we solve our problems as people? It's through asking positive and constructive questions. So, how could I feel better? How could I get rid of the thoughts that drag me down? Because it's
mm,
not usually the situation that drags us down, it's the way we think about it.
yeah.
And if we change our thinking, we will change everything. So it's about recognizing that we have the power to change our thinking. I've read
Mm,
hundreds of books on the psychology of achievement, and you can see some of them behind me. But one of the things that I would say is actually, you know, I think the most important psychological discovery ever is that we choose the way we think, and that the way we think determines how we feel. But of course, when people are in that difficult, dark place, it does not feel like that. But if people
mm,
can help change their thinking, then everything can change. But I also would say don't focus on the problem, because if we
mm,
keep focusing on the problem, we will become um, frozen. We lock onto it, and there's so much evidence from um, psychology, from the military, from motorcycling, for example. I'm a very keen motorcyclist, but if you're wondering how a one-armed, one-legged man rides a motorbike, the answer is very, very carefully. Uh, so uh, be aware of target fixation. If you look at something, we lock onto it. And that's what we do. That's a really good example of what we do with something dangerous. And
mm,
motorcycles go where you look. So look where you want your motorbike to go. And then the other example I would give you is mountain biking. I've taken lots of people mountain biking, and when they focus on the rock in the middle of the path, when they look at it, they hit it. Teach them to look round it. So we look at our vision is how do we get round this obstacle rather than just focusing on it, which means we're much more likely to crash into it.
Mm,
And yet,
mm.
I'm sure you, over the years, with your incredible background, have noticed that sometimes businesses and organizations will focus on a problem and become paralyzed by it.
Yeah. So it's really turning those problems into opportunities and setting your targets and really setting your mind so you can take the right steps towards the right targets. Yeah. Excellent. Hey, let's move forward and talk a bit about the work culture, the leadership, social equity in the UK, in the country where you are living and working mostly. How would you describe the current work culture in the UK?
Very, very diverse.
Mm,
Some organizations are very happy with people working from home. Some feel that they are really keen to get people back into the offices, and some are happy with the combination of the two things. But it is very diverse. There's an awful lot happening. There's a lot of uncertainty, and yet many organizations are moving forward positively. I think it's really important to maintain a focus on people and resilience and to invest in people.
mm,
Um, I'm just thinking about, for example, I've just come back from the United States, but one thing that I think we must remember during challenging times is the importance of creating a culture where we enjoy what we do, where it is not all doom and gloom. You know, of course there are challenges, of course there's a lot wrong, but there are immense opportunities, and there are fabulous opportunities for businesses to grow and to move forward. And I think that the danger is when people say, "Oh, it's all difficult," they then start to think it's all difficult and they can't do anything. One of the things that I love about what I do is generating enthusiasm, and you know, we all spend a lot of time at work, so let's enjoy it. And I just had the good fortune to work in Oceanside, California, and I ran a leadership program with two leaders who I respect enormously, one from the UK, one from the US. And the thing that I felt was really important was that we spent the time to understand what the CEO wanted from the leadership development course, and then to explain why there needed to be a change in attitude and why and exactly what people could do. And then we invested in them to give
mm,
them the skills to understand how they could think to move things forward, to support them. And the most amazing thing about what I do is that I love uh, seeing people shine. And it's tremendous. We are meant to be together as people. Anything that involves decision making, creativity, leadership is much better face to face.
mm, mm. Yeah. How does the leadership in the UK compare to other cultures?
I think that's a brilliant question. And I'm having to pause and think about it because I try not to think of a UK leadership culture or a UK culture. I
Mm,
think much more internationally. So I would think about people and purpose. I would think about um, how those organizations, because of course, a lot of the companies I deal with are international. So
mm,
breaking down that thinking is really important so that people don't think as Europeans or they don't think as people from the US or I don't think of myself as someone from the UK. I see myself as someone who is truly international. So it is difficult for me to give you a sort of siloed view of UK leadership because also most of the companies I work with are international.
mm,
I have noticed, so for example, I do a lot of work with head teachers and they are very open minded, very aware of the constraints of government and finance, but at the same time, um, really, really responsive when you give them principles of resilience and principles of how they can move forward. And I think that we all need that. I think that we constantly need inspiration. And I love that word. What are we in spirit with? Who do we want to be on the same wavelength with? We all need
Yeah,
it. And I think it's coming back to reasons being psychological rocket fuel.
yeah, yeah. And you are working, as you said, with international companies, so it is not very easy to really focus on what's the UK leadership or the culture. But still asking a question on
Mhm.
the well-being and equity, what do you see that there is, you could highlight some challenges you have in the UK on this area?
Yeah, I think there are. I think one thing that I have noticed with business leaders is there's a concern of more and more pressure. I think that um, people are aware that wellness and supporting people is more important than ever. And actually, I do think one of the things that I am seeing here in the UK, particularly with the young people that I support, is I think we're still seeing a legacy of isolation from COVID. And I think particularly with young people at university, they became isolated, and many of them are struggling to get out of that. And I think there's an element of that that has gone over into the workplace. And of course, if you look at some of the independent research on it, a lot of companies are saying, well, people might be happier at home because they don't have to work as hard. And that's one cynical view. But I think that there is also a huge amount of evidence that say sometimes people may be more productive. So there isn't. I don't think there are very clear boundaries, or this is not a situation that is clear. I think that organizations and leaders need to find the way that works best for them.
Mm. But as you said right in the beginning, that people are meant to be together. So really take time working together physically, also not only via Teams or virtually. So it really is important psychologically for individuals.
I think it is, yes, and
Mm.
and yeah, I think if we are going to look at change, if we're going to look at consensus, I think it is very important that people get together, and perhaps as we move forward, conferences are going to become even more important.
Yeah, yeah. Yeah, I have to ask also one question around Brexit, since there's been quite a lot of discussion around that. Do you see that it has shaped the UK workplace culture or really has had an impact?
I personally, I did not vote for it, so I must try and disassociate my own thought. Um, I think it has created um, a lot of challenges. I think that, um, I mean, just for example, purchasing stuff from the EU now is much more difficult. So I think a lot of businesses that were international are
Mm,
struggling. They have a greater administrative burden. I think that most people see themselves as European anyway. Um, I think um, as human beings, we should recognize our similarities are greater than our differences. So I think it's certainly impacted the culture, and you're still talking to lots and lots of people because it was a very narrow percentage that voted for it. And
mm,
perhaps now, one of the challenges, many of those people who voted for it may have passed away. So there is a legacy that people are getting on with it. Um, I think it's challenging in the security landscape as well. So I don't think it's creating isolationism. I think
mm,
that um, I travel a lot in Europe, and people are very welcoming. As I think we are welcoming to people who visit from abroad. London is such a
mm,
truly international city now.
mm.
You know,
Yeah.
you will in London, you'll probably hear other foreign languages spoken much more than English when you walk down the street.
Hmm. Yeah, I have lived in London some years back, and yes, it is very international. But yeah, well, that's very interesting. Hey, let's still go back to purpose-driven leadership, and I have here. something that I read, that the recent studies by the Big Fours show that companies with a strong purpose are 30% more likely to retain talent, and employees who feel a sense of purpose are 50% more productive, which I think is really interesting. But how do you see, what role does purpose-driven leadership play in shifting work culture toward better equity and well-being?
I think it's hugely important, because if we
Mm.
are asking people to work hard and to invest effort, then let's give reasons. Let's identify reasons for that. Um, I've been improving individual and team performance now through speeches, workshops, and programs for more than 25 years. And the most common cause of unhappiness in the workplace is when people do not feel that they have purpose and when they don't feel valued. So creating that purpose, when we have the why, the how becomes much easier. So we need to create the why, and that then in turn brings engagement.
Mm. Are there any inspiring initiatives or companies in the UK leading the way in purpose-driven leadership?
Yes,
What-
there are. There are many.
Mm.
I just to give you one example, actually, in public services, you see tremendous purpose-driven leadership. So the head teachers workshops that I've done quite a few this year. Uh, when we talk about what their reasons are and what their purpose is, it is to create a higher standard of education, to create engagement, to not leave children behind, to make it inclusive, particularly those who are disadvantaged. So that deep commitment that they have is something that they communicate to their staff, and that in turn creates a much more positive culture. That's just one example. In a
Mm.
lot of businesses, many businesses feel that, well, for example, I've worked recently with a recruitment company. They feel that they have tremendous purpose because they are putting the right people in the right jobs. So adding value to their client, the company that wants to find a certain person to fill a role. And,
Mm.
that is for many companies very challenging, particularly in the
Mm.
international space. So they feel that they have immense purpose because they're adding value to the companies, but also many of the people that they place, they've had long-term relationships with. So they feel that they are adding value to them. That's just
Mm.
another example.
Mm.
I worked most recently with a medical devices company. They provide mobility aids. They're really passionate about what they do. So I think
Mm.
it depends what we do, but we need to connect with that purpose, and we need
Mm.
to create a culture where we help each other. And the biggest cause, two of the biggest causes, and I would love to know your view on this. In my experience over the last 30 years, that cause unhappiness in the workplace, the two big things are people not feeling appreciated and also being micromanaged. Those are the two things that I think cause people to leave their roles, when they're being micromanaged and when they're not appreciated.
Yeah, you said you want to hear my view, and yes, I could agree with you. It's exactly when you are being micromanaged, so you don't have the empowerment, you don't have the
Mm.
sort of accountability, ownership of the work that you are doing, and also when you don't really have that inspirational purpose that really
Yeah,
takes you to the work every day. Yeah.
yeah, absolutely. And I think that great leaders are great listeners. And it's not just about making people uh, well, it's not just about listening to people, it's about making them feel listened to, because that in turn creates value. And I'm not saying that leaders should listen and do everything that everybody else says. That's not what I'm saying at all. What I'm saying is that leaders need to make people feel listened to, because that creates trust. And if we
Mm.
create trust, that means that we can have a culture where we will be able to hear from somebody, in the modern business world, things are very complex. The leader is not going to understand everything. That's why listening is so much more important, because they need to listen to specialists, for example, in IT, specialists in AI. We need to understand. So listening is hugely important.
Yeah, again, I have to agree with you, and it is about creating that inclusive environment where exactly people feel that they are being heard. They have the opportunity to share their views, and that's something that the leaders definitely will take into account when they are making important decisions.
Yeah, and of course, the other thing we need to understand is that different cultures may have very different ways of listening and communicating. So some cultures are very vocal, and other cultures are much more introverted. And just because someone's not making a lot of noise, it doesn't mean that they don't understand what's going on or that they don't have a brilliant vision. So we need to create a culture in which people can be heard, and that may involve asking.
It will definitely involve asking, yes. Excellent. I think we need to move forward, and I would really like to ask you that how do you see, what does the future of work? And now I'm focusing again a bit on the UK, but of course, since you are working with international companies, but the future of work, how does it, in your view, look like? You mentioned several really important topics: the trust, the listening skills, and including people, but really reflecting the future of work, ideally in UK, but also more broadly. How would you define that?
Sorry, you just say that again?
Yeah, I was asking that how do you see the future of work? Maybe focusing on the UK, in your view, reflecting really the future of work. How is it developing? Where is it going? So how would you summarize some of the key points?
What I'm seeing at the moment is that there are massive opportunities. I think we're going to see jobs in a few years' time that we don't have now. I think we need to be adaptable. It's also fascinating, this whole notion of AI. I think it will change things enormously. I think the challenge for us as humanity is really well illustrated by something that Einstein said. He said, our technology has advanced faster than our humanity. And I think that's very true, particularly, say, for example, my background of getting rid of landmines and unexploded ordnance and improvised explosive devices, IEDs. Simple technology, such a lack of humanity. And I think that we need to start focusing on our humanity. So I believe that there are immense opportunities. I think that we need to create more political cohesion, and there are awful things going on in the world that we cannot put our heads in the sand and pretend that is not happening. And we need to face difficult issues. But yeah, there are great opportunities at the moment. I don't. We have this uncertainty of AI. I've worked a lot. I've been on a few courses, and I see immense opportunity there. We use it in the right way to improve our lives.
Yeah. Hey, it's been really, really interesting, Chris. I think we need to start wrapping up a bit. What's one key takeaway you'd like our listeners to remember from this discussion?
We can all rise above the things that drag us down. It's very easy to focus on what's wrong and what we don't have. Focus on what is right and what we have, what we can do, and the difference that we can make. Because if we can spread some sunshine and kindness, it will certainly be related back in far greater quantity, unless you're next to a psychopath, in which case keep moving.
Hey, Chris, where can people find more about your work?
Yeah, please get in touch. I'd love to chat with anybody. I'm very passionate about all of this. You can get me on my website, www.chrismoon.co.uk, www.chrismoon.co.uk, or on LinkedIn, Chris Moon MBE, Chris Moon MBE.
Thank you so much, Chris, for joining the People and Purpose podcast. I think your story, your experiences, and also what you are highlighting, what you're working with is really an uplifting, positive message to everybody. It really gives inspiration. And I think we both agree that future is made today. It's not easy. We cannot put our heads into the sand, as you said, but let's not focus on negativity and instead seize the opportunity and spread the kindness and sunshine, as you also said. It's really indeed
Absolutely.
needed in today's world.
Absolutely. And people like us, what we need to do is invent the future. And that's my challenge to everyone. Thank you for watching this, everyone. But here's my challenge for you. What can you do to invent your future?
Thank you, Chris. It's a good challenge to give to everybody. So thank you, Chris, again, and thank you everybody for joining. Stay tuned for the next episode with a fabulous purpose-led leader and focus on a new, exciting, and interesting culture somewhere around the world. Thank you for joining. Thanks again, Chris. Thank you.